pressure off.
Yes.
There's a lot of pressure associated with sex. Pressure of performance, pressure of not just giving, but receiving properly. To you feel pressure to make sure that you're enjoying it and everything, and pressure of frequency, pressure of position. We're talking to married couples here, so we're going to say some raw words.
If there's kids
here.
in the room, take them.
You know, put some headphones in if you're in a public environment. Things like that. We're going to use some raw words here. I'm not going to try to censor myself here, but pressure of positions and creativity and all of that. And so there's so much that P word pressure is involved a lot of times in sex. And where there is pressure in the bedroom, you're not going to have pleasure in the bedroom. I just came up with that. Thank you. That's pretty awesome. Where there's pressure, there cannot be true pleasure. And so we got to remove that pressure. Some of that is external factors. I believe you're right. We have too much input from magazines and like a comment section. You know, we need to turn off all these inputs. You know, we'll talk about a little bit later, but pornography is a major input. And so all of these things create pressure and create a template for you to tell you this is what sex should be like. And if by the time you get married, maybe you've had multiple sexual partners and maybe you came in as virgins, regardless, few people ever come in without a template already formed from the world or from outside environments. And usually 9 times out of 10, it's not a positive environment. You know, they didn't have parents with a positive sex life demonstrating good intimacy before them. You know, a lot of times, most people growing up didn't. And so if you never had a good example, your template was formed by things that were not from the will of God. And as a result, and so especially, you know, I believe in Christian circles, if you're growing up in a Christian household, maybe you were taught good purity, but you weren't taught how to give and receive pleasure necessarily.
Yeah, and you know, you said that, you know, we all kind of come into marriage, no matter if you had previous sexual partners before marriage or you was a virgin when you got married. We all come with a perception of what sex ought to be.
Yes.
Or some experience of what we think sex ought to be, and you come in with an already template that's been, you know, built by your experiences. And even if you lived, it's very rare now, but there are cultures where women don't know anything about sex.
Yeah.
Okay, they get married and they're introduced to it for the first time.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, that's still sort of a template because you're entering a situation with unknowns.
Exactly.
So now it's going to be surrounded with fear and pain and trauma, and that's not what sex ought to be.
Yeah.
You know, sex really got screwed up. No pun intended. This is a dog conversation.
Yes, it is. Dog conversation.
And at the fall.
Yeah.
Between Adam and Eve. You know, sex really began, it became burdensome at that point. At that point. And it was no longer for knowing one another as the Bible describes knowing, and for procreation. We know sex is also for procreation, but just think about that. Sex ought to be life-giving, not just from a physical woman getting pregnant, but bringing life into your relationship.
I like it.
You know?
Yeah.
So once the fall happened, it stopped being that. Now that we're redeemed through Jesus, now we have to rebuild that and rediscover that and remove the taboo of sex. Because some people, you know, like you said, the purity culture, it was about, you know, staying holy, being pure, all those things.
But it's
important. And in some families, some cultures, they scared you. You know, so now you're going into this situation with no knowledge whatsoever. I mean, talking about from even a anatomic level. Like I don't know what's happening physically to me when I'm having sex. So it's a bunch of fear around that and a lot of misconception. And from that, now you got generations of men and women doing it that way. And now they're going to preach it from a position of hurt, pain, trauma, fear. So now we live especially if you live in the Western world, now we're supposed to have a more liberal mentality about sex. Now you got a whole nother extreme where we don't honor sex. It's no longer something that's sacred between a husband and a wife. You can have it as fun. It's a recreational thing. You can have it with anybody or anything. You can self-pleasure yourself. There's even things or people that say that from a woman's perspective, I can do it better than a man. I don't even need you anymore. There's pornography, of course, and all other things that say this is sex. And here's the options, just choose your flavor.
Yep.
You know, so now we're trying to bring it back to marriage, bring it back to the way God designed it for us to experience it. But now we got to wash ourselves, renew our minds to the way God wants it, and create a whole new sexual template for ourselves.
Like that was perfect. If you see the spectrum or this line, you know, I wish I had a whiteboard to draw this, but on one side you got purity, and then on the other side you got perversion.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the middle where we're trying to get to is purpose. Yes. Okay? Because you can make it an extreme. So you were taught purity, great, perfect, but there was never the transition into, okay, purity for when you're single, and now the purpose of sex when you're married. And because if you don't have the purpose, then also you're going to get into perversion.
Yeah.
And that's not better than purity. You know, and again, purity is good.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is if you're never taught purpose. So we have to find out what purpose is. Otherwise, you cross into perversion. And so the question is, what's the purpose of sex?